congratulate each of you upon the recognition and the honor of winning one of these Gleitsman Awards from the Gleitsman Foundation. We've had the privilege here at the Kennedy School over the last few years to play host to these annual presentations, and as you saw from some of the students that you met with this morning, our students find this to be a thrilling experience to meet people from the field, because you are such good role models for them. So our hope had been when you were here that we might capture something on film that would be useful for other students who were not able to see you in person, and also be good for our faculty to be able to use for training purposes. And what we're trying to draw from you today are your reflections, the lessons that you've learned in life and and in the field about the role of social activism, what you have found over the years that you would want to pass on to the next generation about what you've done, what you've learned, and what might be instructive for them. And I think you have to assume that no one who's watching will know much about it, and so people will please be quite elementary. So, Roy, if we could start with you, tell us who you are. You came out of the Harvard Law School. Everyone will be very amazed that someone coming out of the Harvard Law School could give up a life of being a major corporate lawyer and doing something from behalf of mankind instead of your own. Well, that belittles the law school too much. I'm a graduate of the law school.
I know.
I haven't gone quite as straight as you have, but I've wandered from the life of the law as well. Tell us about your life and your organization.
I'm Roy Prosterman. I founded some years ago an organization called the Rural Development Institute, which is also affiliated with the University of Washington School of Law. We are primarily a group of 8 lawyers who work on what I might describe as applied development law, primarily issues of land tenure and land reform in traditional third world or developing countries, and also in the transitional or formerly centrally planned economies. We've worked over the years in 37 countries. I might begin by noting that unlike the U.S., where only 2% of the population works in agriculture, that globally about 45% of the population still makes its living from agriculture. And in the developing countries, it's usually a majority. So the nature of their relationship to land is of crucial importance. Land is the principal asset and the chief source of income and security and status. So if you're just an agricultural laborer or a sharecropper, rather than an owner-operator or someone who owns at least some land of your own, you're likely to have little status, little security, very low income. And in fact, landlessness is generally the best predictor of poverty in developing countries. So we've focused very narrowly on the issue of how to get ownership, or at least owner-like tenure to land, possession of land of a long-term secure kind into the hands of people who are presently landless or without such rights.
Are your 8 lawyers based in the United States, or are they based in the various countries, and are they of other nationalities, or are they American?
Present, we do have overseas staff who are non-lawyers, but our 8 lawyers are based presently 6 in the U.S., 1 in India, and 1 in China. We did have one in Indonesia, but he's at the moment back in the U.S. And have over the last 10 years at least typically had at least one or two of our lawyers stationed overseas for long periods of time. The ones who aren't generally do a great deal of traveling. So our work always starts in a country with intensive village interviewing to ask farmers and landless people what their needs are, what their problems are, how the present land system works, and then gradually formulating policy recommendations which we bring to leadership in the country or in the province and see what may be done about the land problem.
I was astonished when Alan Gleitsman told me how many farmers that you've helped to gain ownership of land around the world. What do your numbers look like?
It's about, well, ownership and also owner-like rights. It's about 120 million households.
120 million households now have own land or have ownership rights as a result of 8 lawyers.
Well, the law is a highly leveraged tool.
It is. It's incredibly leveraged. That's unbelievable. I mean, that's is it 15 million people per lawyer or something like that? I mean, that's incredible leverage.
Well, it takes a great deal of stubbornness to achieve the result. There are countries where we've worked for 30 years without any result. There are other countries where we are able to come in at a moment when there's interest and openness and a window of opportunity, and perhaps in 4 or 5 years a major result can be achieved.
There's something here I'm missing. I hear about the lawyers, I hear about the results. What's the turnkey here? How do you make it actually work?
Well, you do have to have, as a kind of vector resultant of many different factors, you have to have a government in charge that is persuadable, or in some cases is already interested in carrying out major land reform measures, and is willing to listen to what can be achieved, the increase in production, the empowerment of farmers, the increase in social stability. Owner farmers tend to be a very conservative, stable group within the society. The general economic development that can result. Then there may be a dialogue of varying lengths of time as to what kinds of land reform measures look as though they will work under those cultural and social conditions and given what they've already done.
Do you work then from the bottom up with the farmers up through the system, or do you work with the people at the top of a system in a developing country and to work with reforming their land laws down?
Well, both, in the sense it's bottom up to make the recommendations, building on the results of the village field work.
So you build up a grassroots movement or organization?
It's not. Sometimes they already exist, but often it's simply a question of gathering in a fairly systematic way data and information on what farmers already have or lack in terms of land rights and what's likely to be administrable at the local level. Then to take that up and formulate in discussions with the center a package of recommendations.
The center being the center government.
The center government, or in some cases such as India, where the state governments have the power over land reform and dealing with each of the individual state governments, helping them formulate legislation, trying to make sure that the legislation in fact gets through without serious changes that make it ineffective, and then very importantly helping them and working with the government in terms of implementation, including very importantly then follow-up monitoring in the villages to make sure farmers actually are getting the land rights which the legislation is trying to give them, because you can't just stop with the adoption of law and say now success has been achieved. It has to be carried all the way through.
And how did you happen to, are there some countries that lend themselves better to this than others? Are establishing the rule of law and respect for property rights must be fundamental.
Most countries are suitable candidates if at least two basic conditions are met. One, of course, it has to be a country where land tenure is a significant issue, and there are some countries where land reform is not a major issue. There are some, like Taiwan or Japan or South Korea, where major land reform was already carried out very successfully in the immediate post-World War II period. The other big factor is that the government must either already be seriously interested in the issue or persuadable that it is a major issue and that it can be addressed, that there are practical ways.
To walk us through your, if you would, please, Roy, a country where you were particularly proud of the changes that took place as a result of your efforts.
Well, let me cite one that may have appeared initially as impossible or very difficult. It was actually our first success. Oddly enough, was in South Vietnam back in the early 1970s when. And actually in the late 60s, I worked with the Stanford Research Institute team that was asked to look at the land problem there, concluded that it was very severe indeed, that the primary appeal that the Viet Cong were able to make in the rural areas was the promise of land. Now, the farmers in the South were not aware that the same promise had been made in the North, but then followed by forced collectivization, which had been a disaster. But it seemed ridiculous to approach the problem purely in terms of so-called security issues or through force, when really a fundamental issue was whether farmers supported the government or not based on their perception of whether the government stood for giving them rights to land. What had happened in the past was when villages had been liberated, our soldiers had naively moved on, and then the local forces had moved in with the old landlords and given the land back to them. I formulated at that point a Land of the Tillers program, which was pretty radical. It took its clues in many cases from the land reforms which had been carried out in Japan and Taiwan and South Korea. It was a universal distribution of land to the tenant farmers, and actually we got support both from the Nixon White House and from Hubert Humphrey and others. Both parties supported the idea, and then President Chu decided that this was essential. Carried out a land reform that gave land ownership to 1 million families of tenant farmers in the South between 70 and 73. Three fascinating results. One was rice production went up by 30%. Another was that indigenous Viet Cong recruitment went down by 80%. And a third was that political attitudes, as reflected in grassroots interviewing, began to shift decisively in favor of the South Vietnamese government. Now, it all should have been done 10 years earlier. By then it was much more like an interstatal war. There were divisions coming down from the north. There was understandable war weariness in the U.S. But the final chapter, actually, is that by and large the communist government, when they took over, never collectivized most of the South because they didn't want to lose that increase in production. They didn't want to face the political fallout. They created formal collective organizations, but they generally didn't force people to contribute their land. And then, about 10 years later, in the early 80s, they looked around and said, well, gee, our collective farms in the north are awful. Our family farms in the south are highly productive. Let's decollectivize the north, which they did. And then they invited me back in '93 to see it. They see, we've decided family farms are the way to go. And in fact, their total grain production has gone up from 13 million tons in '79 before they decollectivized to 31 million tons currently. They've gone from being a major importer of grain to a major exporter of grain. They've given farmers at least long-term rights. They don't have private ownership, but they have 20-year use rights to land. We've done interviewing, of course, quite extensively in that '93 round, and found that farmers feel very secure. They're able to have transactions in their land rights. They're even able to mortgage their land rights. So that was perhaps a bit disarming in that our first experience was one of considerable success. We've had, for example, long-term experiences of 30 years in the Philippines, which have been extremely frustrating, or experiences of 15 years in Egypt, where they've actually reversed the land reform that they had earlier had on the books. Been very frustrating. The China experience has been a very positive and encouraging one, and there we came in after they decollectivized, but we've been able to advise the government on next steps because farmers had been very insecure. The local cadre had been able to take land back and distribute it in new patterns based on demographic change. Now they've moved to a program to provide 30-year use rights, which are fully transactable to the farmers, embodied in written contracts, and they're about 40% of the way to full implementation. About 85 million households have received those 30-year rights. They've still got about 125 million households to go.
Tell me, Harvard Law School graduate what year?
58.
And you practiced law
For 6.5 years.
6.5 years on the West Coast?
No, in New York with Sullivan and Cromwell.
So you went to one of the most prestigious law firms in America from Harvard Law School. And then you left after 6.5 years to do this?
Yes.
I'm really curious about the satisfactions in life and how you would describe to a younger generation the satisfactions of working for Sullivan Cromwell, which is, it's so hard to get a job there. And then to leave and go off and become a social activist. What's the contrast for you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't discourage people from working for major law firms. It's for some people it's their cup of tea, and they like to do that and enjoy that for 50 years. And even if you don't do that, you may want to do it for 3 or 6 years and decide what you really want to do. But I would say to young lawyers that you won't lose anything in life if you choose not to go that route, that you can teach or become a social activist or work with a public interest law firm or a niche group that's dealing with public issues and achieve a great deal of satisfaction and at least live at a satisfactory level. One does not need 3 houses or 4 cars or a yacht. I think satisfaction in life really doesn't come principally from such things.
How much satisfaction have you drawn from your own work?
Huge satisfaction, sufficiently so that I'm now about to turn 68. My tentative plan at this point is to keep at it for another 10 years to retire at 78.
Aha. And you have been twice nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, yes.
So another 10 years it may well happen.
Oh, well,
We'll see.
thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, Fazle, perhaps we could turn to you now, if we might, because your work in Bangladesh has also been to advance the life of people living in rural areas.
Yes.
And yet it's different. So tell us about who you are, what you've been doing.
Well, my name is Fazle Abed. I'm a chartered accountant. I joined the Shell Oil Company after I qualified in London.
So you just, like Roy did, you started off in a more traditional career pattern.
Right. So what happened in 1971, Bangladesh had a war of independence, and some of us who were involved, who were around at that time, felt that we should join the liberation struggle for Bangladesh.
Mhm.
So I left Shell and joined the liberation movement. Fortunately, the liberation, it took, it was short. The struggle was short.
Was it a physical struggle for you?
Yeah, it was. We
What
joined the freedom fighters.
You were a fighter?
Right.
And did you have a gun?
Yes, of course. Yeah, sure. Then Bangladesh became independent in December 1971. And at that time I had a choice either to go back to my old profession or do something else. So I decided to work for the returning refugees who were coming back from India into Bangladesh, and started working in a remote rural area where there were about 400,000 refugees came back from India, and we started resettlement work for these refugees. The kind of work which one is doing in Afghanistan right now. So that's how I started. And so the rehabilitation and relief work was completed within a year. And then one had the choice of deciding whether to continue with this work or do something else. So I decided that the poverty in rural Bangladesh was such that relief and rehabilitation is not going to solve the problem. We needed long-term commitment for poverty alleviation and development in rural Bangladesh. So that's how I started BRAC.
What does BRAC do?
The Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee.
Right. What does it do? What do you actually do?
So it basically started work in rural development. Initially, we started with the entire villages, organizing village people and so on. But we realized that in order to help the really poor people, you need to target the poor people in the village and not have the entire village as cooperatives and so on. So we decided to target our approach only for the poorest half of the village, in other words, the landless people in the village, and particularly women who were the poorest. So we started organizing the poorest women in cooperative groups, started providing them conscientization and legal literacy.
What was the first thing?
Conscientization,
Raising their
raising.
consciousness?
Yes, through a process of education. Conscientization is an idea which came out of Paulo Freire's work, who was an educator in Brazil, who came out with a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed in 1972, and we learned from this, and we started organizing the poor with that. So that methodology of getting people together and empowering them through knowledge about their own society, what their own dynamics of their society, and providing legal literacy, the rights and obligations.
Legal literacy.
Legal literacy, yeah. So we organized groups of women in the villages, and over the last 30 years, we have grown to about 60,000 villages and have organized 3.8 million women, mostly women, 98% are women, there are some men also. And we started programs in poverty alleviation. So the first thing we wanted to do was basically just to give them a sense of self-worth. So we went into organizing groups of women and as I said, education and legal literacy. And we started also with small savings program initially. We felt that that will give them some, something to look forward to. The reason savings is very important, we felt, was that most people, very poor people, live from day to day. So if they earn a day wage that day, they can feed their families. If there was no work for the day, then of course they have to go starve or borrow from neighbors and so on to feed. So basically we felt that savings sort of gives people a slightly longer time frame to think in terms of the future rather than just day to day. So small savings was very important, so we started that. And then we started...
Through banks there, that they would put their money into some sort of
No,
bank?
it's not a... No,
What
we
is
started the savings program within the same organization.
Within the same collective group?
Same collective group.
Association?
Association, yeah. We call them village organizations. So they started collecting small savings, and we started small loan program, microfinance. And we found that most people, given a small sums of money, can repay in installments, weekly installments, over a period of a year or so, whatever is given. So most loans were, the size was between $50 to $100 in the initial period. But now, of course, most of our loans are about $100 to $120 average. So we give out about $300 million every year. Last year we gave it out to about $300 million. This year is going to be $350 million to some 3.45 million borrowers.
How do they use that money?
Well, many things. I mean, small enterprises, mostly in agriculture, horticulture, livestock, fisheries, rural transport,
It's
small
mostly for commercial
businesses.
purposes, not for consumer.
For self-employment,
Yeah.
basically for employment, self-employment, enterprise, small enterprise. So these loans are, and then also self-employment, there is a limit to it. In the village, you can create employment or work for yourself. There's a limitation. And we also decided that we could also help in promoting work for people. So we looked at what kind of enterprises that we could promote in rural Bangladesh. And we, I remember in 1985, we started planting mulberry trees. We planted over 5 years about 25 million mulberry trees all over Bangladesh, so that the 100 trees were given to each woman, so that they become silkworm rearers. So the leaves are fed to the silkworms. I don't know whether you know it, but
My high school training is starting to come back. All right.
all right.
Good.
So we created about 100,000 jobs for poor
Wow.
women,
Wow.
because we provided the infrastructure for them to get into silkworm rearing.
Yeah.
So in that kind of way, so we, for example, got poor women to get into poultry farms, small poultry farms. So we provided day-old chicks to them. We recruited one of them to become a vaccinator, so that the mortality of hens and chicks could go down.
Mhm.
So, and we linked them up with the livestock department of the government, which provided vaccines.
Right.
So we have now about 48,000 women who are vaccinators in the villages. So the poultry business could flourish.
Uh-huh.
And we provided day-old chicks. So right now we provide about 2 million day-old chicks per month to women who are getting into poultry business. So we not only provided credit, but we also provided other kinds of inputs and marketing support and so on. So it's not just a microfinance program without any other kinds of inputs.
So it has microfinancing plus helping them learn and
That's
grow.
right.
And
That's right. And also
you help them learn how to fish. as
yeah,
well.
we also provide healthcare programs.
Right, right.
And we also provide education for children.
Mm.
So we have, we found that the poorest children are not going to primary schools, many of them because of poverty, and some because of gender. I mean, the girl children are not going to school at all. So we started, what is called non-formal primary education, a 5-year education program. So we now have 34,000 schools run by BRAC, and we have 1.2 million children in them.
You have 35,000 schools.
Right.
And Gleitsman mentioned that you have
Right.
a vast number of
Right.
schools, 35,000.
Right.
And are they in effect private schools by Western standards? Or are they public schools? What are they? I don't understand.
Well, they are basically private schools run by BRAC for poorest children. So we look at the poverty of the child before we enter them into
Right.
school.
But are there schools in the same communities, villages, towns that are run by the government?
Yes, there
But
are.
you have these other schools where children can come.
That's
rural
right.
children.
Only those who have either not enrolled at all in the government schools or who have dropped out without any meaningful learning.
So you're taking some of the toughest cases.
We're taking the toughest cases, and we take them at the age of 8. If we started at the age of 6, then we'll be competing with the government school, which we don't want.
Yeah.
So we are really adding to the number of facilities
Well,
which the government is providing.
But 35,000 schools is a lot of schools.
There's a lot of schools, and we want to do more, because I think there are many more children who have.
Now, you
no
were the
access to
founder
it.
of this program.
I'm the founder of BRAC, yes.
Let me ask you, how does this differ from Grameen Bank, Grameen Phone? We hear about a good deal.
Well, Grameen Bank, as I said, the Grameen Bank is a bank. It
Yeah.
provides credit. And I
Right.
said that we are a development
Right.
program.
You
So
provide-
we
you go
provide
beyond what-
inputs, we provide training, and so on. And we are also in health. We are in education. So basically we are a development program which also has microfinance, as Grameen has.
Yeah.
So I suppose we are a little more developmental in approach than just a microfinance bank.
Fazle, help me, is Bangladesh, I know it's a country that's very special to you because
Right.
you fought for its independence, but is there something in the water in Bangladesh that encourages these kind of micro lending programs that also do that? I mean, it's become famous as a place where some of these experiments are
Right.
underway. Is there something about the culture and about the women in Bangladesh? Some of these programs are
I think it's because of our experience in the liberation movement. Some of us came of age at that time. If you talk about Professor Yunus, he also was involved in one way or another in the liberation movement. So that's a historical event that changed our lives to some extent. So that's one.
In what sense? What is it?
In the sense that we have gone through a traumatic experience of fighting for our own independence.
Mhm.
So that has have affected me. Certainly, if there was no war of independence, I would be in Shell Oil Company somewhere. But anyway, but that's one. Secondly, I think there was a lot of support from donors with the newly independent country, Bangladesh. So we received a lot of donor support initially, which sort of helped us to expand our program. Thirdly, I think it was the government of Bangladesh who was unable to provide the basic services to its people. And some of us felt that it has to be done, and we took up the challenge and we started providing it. So that's the opportunity was there for us to expand.
And I know you're reaching all these people. How have their lives changed in the sense of are they lifting themselves out of poverty?
Oh, dramatically. I think there has been a dramatic change in infant mortality, in literacy rate, in women's empowerment, in many different social indicators. Bangladesh has done dramatically well compared to other countries in the neighboring countries. For example, we had a fertility rate of 7 per woman in 1975. It's now 3. Our infant mortality rate was 135 in 1980. It's now 45. Child mortality rate used to be 250. It's now about 90. So it's going down. I mean, so there has been dramatic changes, and also our food production has gone up. We have doubled our food production over the last 20 years. Our life expectancy has gone up from 49 to 61. So we have made a lot of gains, particularly in women's lives. I think we have made a lot of
How about
progress.
the income level?
the income level has gone up from $120 per capita income to about $390 now, so in dollar terms. But I think this quality of life has changed also for the poor. But there is still, I mean, we are still a poor country,
Right.
and we need to keep on at it for a much longer period.
Right. So when one hears these numbers about the number of people in the world who live on less than $1 a day or less than $2 a day, there are many in Bangladesh who are clearly living on
Right.
less than
Right.
$2 a day. But the trend line is the encouraging
Right.
point.
Right.
There are changes coming from
Yes.
the bottom. Now, tell me about, because I'm curious, and I wanted to ask the same question I asked Prosterman, and that is your personal satisfaction going from Shell to
Oh,
Freedom Fighter and now.
There's no comparison. I think life for me has been very extremely satisfying. But then, of course, one realizes that there's so much more to be done in Bangladesh. You really can't be really satisfied with what we have done, in the sense that you feel that there's so much agenda that still needs to be tackled. So many challenges still to be met. So one feels satisfied to some extent, but one feels that if one had another 20 years life, I'm 67, if I lived another 20 years, then I could do so much more.
So, but isn't that always the case? I mean, if you're going to have a satisfying life, you have to see that there's so much more that someone else then has to.
Right.
You become the inspiration for others to carry on.
Right. I suppose I had built an organization which will survive me and flourish and do well.
Well, thank you. I think what I'd like to do is, if I could now, this is very, very helpful. If we could switch seats, and you have been working to tackle issues of poverty and development as well, and you've devoted a quarter of a century to that in India, and you have large plans for the future. So we're anxious to hear about all of it. So tell us about you and what you've been doing.
At the outset, I come from a rural background. Particularly, I was grown by my grandparents, not with the parents, and then came to the school, middle school, to the towns.
Southern India?
Southern India, southern part of India, Tamil Nadu.
What is the land like there? It's quite rural.
I think almost India is 76% rural, and then only the rest is urban. So it's the same thing. I think only few towns now they are developing. I think the rural areas are shrinking, as you say, but still not very much. So still rural. Many people live in rural areas and then depend on land, whether it is they have land or whether they don't have land. Still, people depending on land are so many in India. 76% of the people depend on land, out of which only I think a very small number must be, I think, landed people, I think 26% or 27%. Rest of them are, I'm afraid, or from the landless groups, or one who work for as sharecroppers or on lease, or as somebody working with somebody as a partnership, something like that. So India is basically still rural, and I belong to that group of people because my grandfather had some land in the villages, and so he had a very small farm, and he lived like, like at that time even 30 acres is a big farm. And then I was with him, and then for the middle school I came into this school. My father was a bureaucrat with the British. Then I joined him, and then I studied. I joined my urban family, that's my father. Though I was grown up by my grandfather, I actually joined my father quite late, after my 13 or 14 years.
And was your father living in in southern India, or was
Yes, he was living in Chennai, and we were living in about 2 hours distance from there, that's it. And then when you came to the city, your perception was quite different. I think it was so much of the caste restriction. You were born a Brahmin in the villages, and then there was so many caste restrictions that you were the uppermost and you are not able to touch others and that kind of a thing. When you come into the city, I think the equalizes everything, and then there it becomes that whose daughter you are. you are a daughter of a bureaucrat, or the class becomes more important here. And that's how we studied in the school and all that. Then I did my graduation in geography and economics, and then I did my 1 year management in US, I think way back.
How did you come to the United States?
Because I was sponsored by organizations like Gandhi Gram to make a study in management, women in management.
Women in management.
Right.
And where did you study?
I studied management.
Yeah, but where in what community, in what institution?
Institution is the CITPA, Center for Population Activities.
Mhm.
That's where I was nominated in 80s.
Yeah, and where is that? Tell me where that is.
It's in Washington.
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 So you spent a year in Washington,
Yes, I
D.C.
think she might be coming. Peggy Carlin will be coming today, I think, to attend the ceremony. That's what I told her. She's one of the persons who is producing leaders.
Uh-huh.
And they are calling themselves as an organization which is throwing up leaders all over the world.
Good.
That's how it is. And then it is way back. I married a non-Brahmin from the Brahmin family. And it was a social ostracization. I had to be kept out of the family's programs. I think we have 7 sisters and 1 brother. And all the 7 sisters' marriages was not in, all the 6 sisters' marriages was not informed to me. They were not, I was not invited because I went out of I went away and I married outside the caste. That was the first social ostracization I felt. And therefore, that made me really think how much the poor Harjans or the untouchable or the lowest class must be feeling by discrimination. That was the first time. In the same city, your sister is getting married, but you are not able to attend. And everybody is coming, the families who know this family and that family come and ask us, your sister is getting married today, you are not actually attending this marriage. And that was the kind of oppressions that one has gone through. And therefore I thought that also when I came into this family, the family had, of course, I think they had freedom fighters into this family, particularly the uncle of my husband was in jail during the freedom days, and then he brought me into politics. I was in politics nearly for 1961 to 77, but I found that the politics was deteriorating and we were going back to the colonial days because I think the new class that emerged after the independence could not, I think, carry through the vision of those founding fathers. They were rather thinking returning back to the caste network, returning back to the, I think, the political, I think, feudalistic network. I think they have started amassing wealth and amassing lands, amassing properties, and then their agenda became their own personal agenda. It was not the political agenda of the people for whom they promised and came. The people who voted for them had had expectations from them. So the agenda was not the expectation of the people. The agenda was, as a matter of fact, their own personal agenda. We felt that to reform this politics, to reform these politicians, and they were not able to even gather momentum. They were not able to even speak to the large number of people because the people lost their faith in them. When a politician addressed the meeting, there was hardly any 100 people. I think the days of people addressing mass meetings were gone. Therefore, I felt that the leadership has to be taught a lesson, that what should be, if you have fought a freedom for the political independence of this country, then we have to fight another freedom for the economic independence of this country, and that is through mobilizing the masses, addressing mass meeting, I think sensitizing the poor, and then empowering the poor, apart from other programs such as the banks and then organizations, social platforms, many other things in addition, because that is development part.
So when you took that passion and that belief, what did you do with it? You started an organization?
The first thing was that I was with the politics. When I was with the politics, I think I used to work with the flood relief, for the flood relief programs. In the flood relief programs, you have to go into the slums and villages, try to give them relief measures like bed sheets and food and clothing and money and so on. So every year I used to do it for 10-15 years. And then one year they all felt that the politics is totally failing, what do we do? And then I said I'm not coming back to the Congress party anymore. I will be staying home. That the poor people came to me and said, let us start an organization ourselves. Said starting an organization is easy, but everybody can be president, secretary, and so on. But ultimately, I can only shake hands with the governors and chief ministers. But how is it going to help you? Are you going to be part of the whole organizations? Unless you see that you have a role to play at all levels of this organization, there is no point in actually starting an organization. That is how I felt, and that is how I told them very clearly. They said, yes, let us invent a new innovative organization. Then we organized women at the grassroots. Then we made an area leader, we found an area leader who was the first woman who organized so many groups. Then when it became very unwieldy in that area, then we appointed organizers for the same amount of earning that she would earn in that slums and villages through her work. It is not that we went and organized women and innovated jobs, but we organized women who were already working.
Who were?
I think the vendors, hawkers, peace rate workers, I think fisher women.
They were already working.
Working. See,
Yeah.
it is not that I think way back in 1965 when I came into United States, people were questioning me. People are dying on the road. They are not working. They are very lazy. It is not so. The people were not lazy, nor the poor were a problem. There were solutions by themselves. Only thing is that we have not been able to find the potential of those people.
So
Actually,
what did you do? Okay, you found these women, you started organizing toward what purpose, and what did you...
I think we found out what is the difficulties that they have in their work. The first thing is, and each one of them said that they wanted a platform. That is, they are selling it on the platform, the municipalities come and trouble them, the police people come and trouble them. Secondly, they have a money lender problem, they take away the most of the profits. And thirdly, that their work role is not very much respected even by their own husbands. I think they are unemployed. The entire organization of the family is run by the women and children, but still they have no respect in their families. So these were the three items that one has to immediately take up. The organizing them, and then on the trade lines, then establishing a structure in which they can participate at all levels. And thirdly, make it totally women intensive. That's the most productive group in a family. And finally, address them with critical needs like training, like reproductive health care, like the credit, and like the children's educational rehabilitation centers where the children were working. When we went there, 68% were heads of households. They were the only sole earners of income. Nearly 70% of the children I found was child laborers in those families. And they were only 20% had the electricity in their homes. The rest of them were using kerosene and then that kind of energy. So these were the kinds of people. Now we are finding that it is far better. And then first we organized it with the regular bank loans. The banks were nationalized way back in 1969. Congress had excellent programs. But the thing is, the implementation level, it was very bad. These nationalization programs, the poor people should get at least 1% of their profit at 4%. That is, at 4%. The poor people should get 1% of the profit of the nationalized bank should go to the poor people at 4% rate, which is called differential rate of interest. And that program I made use of in the beginning. When we started, it was 800 women. Then we became slowly into larger groups. The women went out since they took active part at all the levels. One group went out and formed another group. One group went out and formed another group. Horizontally, the organization had enormous growth and it became a movement soon. Therefore, I thought that when they became very, very big, the banks said, no, we are not going to take up small loans in large numbers. Then we had to initiate our own cooperative. The cooperative, though initiated in India, were not functioning very well because they were very corrupt and were in the hands of politicians. Then we had to see that we reformed the cooperatives and we established a cooperative. Now the cooperative has nearly 320,000 women who are taking loans, nearly 79 crores. I think somebody has to translate that into millions. And 98% recovery. The women are running the whole bank. They are the managers. They are actually the directors and they are taking care of the field work, and then their policy, they are making a field-oriented policy, and they are able to talk to us saying that what they require, what they need, and they are advising us. That is the way that we established. Secondly, that we started with a healthcare program in which you see the women in India are actually oppressed by caste, the class, and the gender situation. The gender situation is cultural, patriarchal. So the caste situation is that in a workplace, if a man and a woman wanted to marry, if they belong to different castes, it will not be recognized. They will be actually abused in so many terms. So such, I think, the kind of relationships we actually legalized and said it is intercaste marriages. And we were the first ones to find out that how the intercaste marriages can be so very, I think, successful rather than organized and arranged marriages, which is very large in number even in India today. That is the cause of oppression for women, as a matter of fact. That is actually the significant symbol of the patriarchy and the culture in India, that is the organized marriage and the caste marriage within the caste network. So we started the intercaste marriages, then we started the bank loans for them, and then we wanted to give them a platform to fight the policemen, the municipalities, the other kinds of oppressors, like they don't have water, electricity, good schools, good hospitals. And there I think we started a trade union for them. And that trade union is able to go on long marches even when their grievances are not met, when their demands are not met with. And then this is where we thought that conscientizing women, conscientizing or empowering women, or making them work at all levels, and then through collective consciousness and the collective through collective action was actually born results. And that is where we were very happy about.
I want to go back to this conscientizing. Fazle Abed used that same word and talked about
Sensitization.
Sensitization, but drawing from theories developed in Brazil. Now, did you have some of the same? Where did this whole notion of conscientizing?
Thing is, the people, see, if the people are poor, you may think that the poverty is actually, they are born poor. They think like that. They do not know how the poverty is imposed on them. If you see, they are paid less. See, they don't have access to land or access to housing or access to other kinds of, the productive assets. That means, for generations they have been exploited. A woman works along with her husband, but the husband is paid, the wife is not paid. Sometimes the rural women are called to work at home. They are given a morsel of food. They are not given the regular wages. So all these are imposition of poverty on them. This, you have to make them understand that you are working under these conditions. So your working conditions have to improve, and your actually living conditions will then automatically improve. This is precisely the sensitization and creating awareness, empowering people. This is where we call it conscientization or sensitization. I hope.
I understand. Now, your personal role in this is on the organizational side, or do you must have to inspire people? You must have to stir them up.
Yes, the thing is the large mass meeting, addressing large mass meetings.
Yeah.
I think the politicians became very jealous, and they thought, how do people come to my meetings and not to their meetings?
Yeah.
I
What's
think
the answer to that?
that is where I made a mark, really, that I used to call the politicians for the intercaste marriages and say that in 6,000 women, 10,000 women, they have to solemnize the wedding. And the ministers and the governors and the president used to rush to our meetings saying that I'll come to those meetings and solemnize those weddings. And those weddings had all the social recognition when those the political people or the people in big offices came. So we made use of the big officers on their weaknesses. That is where I told them that you have to attract to people not by advising them, but most important thing is that you have to address to their needs as well.
Right.
Once when their their needs are addressed, naturally I think they oblige you as well and say, tomorrow I need 1,000 people to go on the road to strike against the diesel price hike or the petrol price hike. I'll get 10,000 people on the road, not 1,000. Why? How do I get it?
Yeah,
If
how
a
do you
po-
do it?
That's it.
How do you do it?
I do it because the people are known to me in each of these areas. In each of the areas, I don't go and organize myself. In every 500 families, there is a cadre, she is a natural leader thrown out of the, I think, slums or village itself. She has 10 people. And if that 10 people, each one of them must have 10 people. That means a woman cadre has 100 people. If I have,
So you, out of every 500 families, you can spot a leader.
yes, I can.
To help organize within them.
Yes, we have 7,000 leaders now like that.
That's 7,000 leaders that you've spotted, brought forward.
Yes, in all the 3 southern states.
How do you spot them?
Well, no, the thing is, when we go into a meeting, we don't allow that I address and you listen. That's not it. Many people get up and then talk to me as well. And then we allow them that, give them the chance. Then I find a potential leader when she's talking to me very seriously. This people came and that people came, that panchayat leader came, that policeman came and this happened and that happened. She will come and tell me. That means that we will spot out those leaders from the natural situation. That is how I think this kind of, and then also we trained them. The training and orientation in the Working Women's Forum, the moment they get into the organization, they get empowered. Then when they get trained, they are doubly empowered. And then they go out, they just are able to identify as many leaders as possible. The leadership is not developed. It is spontaneous. Only thing is somebody has to identify it and reinforce it by training. And that is how even the reproductive health care program of ours, where the women's role, particularly their economic role, is to be strengthened, both as a mother and as a worker. As a mother, her role as the reproductive role is a social role. I think people should recognize that. And therefore she has a right for safe motherhood, child survival, contraceptive practices. It is a right choice that she has to make it. Nobody should impose a population control on her through female surgery. That's the kind of thing. And she has to decide how many children she has to have. In the same way, as a worker, she has several health hazards. Like in the cigar rolling, she has respiratory, and then as a weaver, she has some stomach pain. As a handicraft producer, she has eye throat problem. This health hazard is also attacked. Like that, we have so many health cadres every 500 families. They are network of advocates. They advocate the health consciousness. They practice this advocacy system in creating health consciousness within the community. Coming from the class, they are able to hold much more in that area rather than anybody else. What we found was a man was a leader. Now a woman is an alternate leader in the household. And
Everyone is
almost all my members are far more important leaders that people come to them and consult them as men are consulted.
So you've become a leader of leaders.
Yes.
That's your
No, I can't see that.
Sounds close. Let me move on, if I might, in the interest of time, which is ticking away here. Roman, tell us about your organization, the multifunctional platform. What is that all about? What do you do? You're different. Not an accountant, not a lawyer, and not a rural firebrand organizer.
Absolutely
in
not.
India. You're an engineer.
Yes, I am an engineer.
And tell us about your background and what you've developed.
Okay, I've been born in Geneva. I make my study in Geneva, Switzerland.
And you're Swiss.
I am Swiss, yes. And after my education and a short period in Switzerland, I decided to go outside to help training people in Algeria with an organization for 1 year after the war in Algeria. This was in 1966. And after that, I see this is a good way to be productive for other people. Well, in Switzerland, everything is developed, everything is no problem. You don't have a role to do, just be quiet and make your life. And this is not the way I want to make. So after Algerian, I go to Benin for rural cooperative, for training blacksmiths, training mechanics for tractors, for,
You went to Africa to train people.
yes, to train people.
Okay.
And then in Benin, I stayed 2 years, and then after I go to Upper Volta, no is Burkina Faso. I'm training blacksmiths also, very easy. And then I start small industry to produce flour. Well, the flour,
Plow.
plower,
Plow,
plow,
Plow.
to plow.
Plow. So it produced
Agriculture
plows.
implement.
plows.
Yeah, farm
Cattle,
implements, okay.
farmer plant. For
Yeah.
animal drawn equipment.
But it'd
That's
be
plow.
drawn by oxen or
Oxen
That's
and
a
donkey.
plow.
plow. Yes.
Plow. Excuse my poor English.
No.
And then, well, at this time, the plow were imported from Senegal or from France or somewhere that. And I was involved in an ILO project to training blacksmiths. But we are making more or less the after service from the producer. We are repairing the plow, but not producing, and this was not good for the local employment. So we decided to start a production. Everybody laughed, everybody was critical, but we start, and after 3 years we produced 10,000 plow per year, and so much cattle for transportation and so. And after 12 years I emigrated to Niger, with FAO, and then with USAID, and then with EEC, and I manage a little shop for developing prototype. And in Burkina Faso I start with the platform. Then after in Niger I start also with the platform, but as model. And then I was engaged with ILO, not ILO, excuse me, UNIDO, United Nations International Organization for Industry in Vienna, with the goal to decrease the penability of the woman work every day. It means grillet, to establish good millet grinder. Excuse me, English, it's not so.
Grinder.
Grinder. Mechanized grinder. So first, I don't want to go to this project. Well, these grinders are large spread and doesn't function after 1 year if they are managed by the woman. Well, the woman had no sufficient power, and the men, after a certain time, come and colonialize the women organization.
Right.
So they took the grinder to them, and then the women come and pay. So the UNIDO accept that my basic idea to make the grinder not only consumers of money from the village. Well, this is for they consume diesel and so, but they don't produce. They don't have added value to sell and to have more income. So we start the platform like this. We put on the technical side, we put a belt on the millet grinder, for the motor for the millet grinder, and we produce electricity. And with this electricity we can do a lot of things, the village can do a lot of things more productive. They can have an electric generator, they can have oil press, and various tools like welding for the blacksmiths and so. So they rent a part of the mill. They work the normal mill work one hour per day, not more. And with this additional activity, he work 5, 6, 7 hours per day. So he have some income, some money income, like charging battery for the television. The television is buy with people have money. He can buy the television, so he can pay the battery recharge, the new charge of battery. So you give money to the woman, and the woman have more money in the.
Yeah, I'm missing something here. I don't. how do you generate the electricity? You're the entrepreneurial force. You're the planner. You're the developer of this project. Is that right?
Yes.
And you bring your engineering skills as well as
Yes.
your organizational skills to connect people up through the project. But I'm still not clear on how the project works. You say you generate electricity. You need a generator. What's the source of the electrical power?
The source of electric power, you see, if you have a grinder, a millet grinder, you have a diesel engine
To run the grinder.
to run the grinder.
Right.
So if you put a belt of this diesel engine to the generator, then you
Right.
produce electricity.
Oh, you connect up you produce additional electricity to run more than the grinder.
No, the diesel engine
Yeah.
produce mechanical force.
Right.
This mechanical force will transform in electrical energy with a belt,
Right.
go from the motor to the electric generator.
Okay.
So it turns the generator, and the generator produce electricity.
Yes, and you-
like the generator in your car for
Right,
charging
right,
the battery.
right.
Exactly.
And you figured out how to generate that additional electricity, right? You
No additionally produce
produce electricity.
electricity. Well,
And what do you do with that electricity?
Then we start to have several activity like charging battery
Okay.
for the television.
So you use that electricity to help produce income for
to
people.
produce income, to
Wow.
to
So
welding.
electricity is almost like money. It's almost like
Exactly.
micro lending. It has
Exactly.
a parallel to micro lending.
Yes.
You lend electricity to people.
Yes,
Or you let
exactly.
them use the electricity.
And we can pumping water for the woman. So the woman have the grinder, the
Yeah.
huller, and they can pumping water from the
Wells.
wells.
Right. So you put your engineering
Yes,
skills.
in service for these people. These people ask me, the first things they want is charging battery for the television. They say it is a main goal of your development. They say no, they will bring us little money, and with this little money we can decrease the price of the millet grinding.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
enlarge the access of poor women.
Right.
And so I fall in this poverty decreasing. I was not prepared for that, but the people ask that.
Yeah.
So and then we are working for the people. So the platform is two things. Is one thing is this equipment,
Yeah.
very basic equipment,
Yeah.
but the other things is a philosophy to demonstrate the village. They can do something with
Right.
with very small equipment. They can totally change our life. Well, pumping water with electricity in the rural village in Mali is something completely crazy. If you ask the village, they laugh. They say, where we are finding the electricity? And you tell them, yeah, you have a motors, they can make electricity. They say, no, this motor can't make electricity. It's impossible. And you demonstrate that, and after that the people understand everything very quick. And then you start, they discover, you create such dynamic. Well, the bigger village has no electricity also, but the very small village has electricity. And they ask, normally after that, they ask, can we have electricity in our house? Exactly, we say, why not? If you are prepared to pay, you can have it. But for paying electricity in your house, what do you want to do to
Right.
increase your revenues?
Right.
So this dynamic can be used to starting.
Right. I understand. All right, listen. You all have to leave soon. I'd like to stop now just for a minute. Gather us how you will. I want to ask you, you've each listened to the other. You've spoken, but you've also heard. And what lessons do you draw from this? I find this really interesting that, I'm sorry, Roy, Roy, again, to come back to this, that that one does not need to depend on large institutions of government or of corporate life to achieve social change. And in fact, enormous social change can come from organizing at the grassroots. And and mobilizing people through individual efforts. I mean, you've done that. It's enormous. We just had the number here since we've been talking that as much as 10% of the arable land in the world has been changed because of your own personal efforts, the efforts of your organization. So what do you hear when you listen to these others about that?
In a sense, I guess there's a common theme. It's perhaps a term that's used too much, but I think it's a suitable term: empowerment. Whether it's endowing with land assets, or integrated rural development, or organizing women at the grassroots to engage in self-help and microcredit activities, or literally empowering through appropriate technology, including power, that there are a number of successful approaches that simply, I think, need to be replicated more widely, globally, and there has to be, this another link back to the developed countries, there has to be much greater consciousness of how foreign aid can be used by the developed industrial societies to support the range of best practices, the range of programs that really have proven themselves, and that work. Poverty can be ended on the planet in the next 10 to 15 years. There's no doubt of that. It just takes a little bit of application of proven practice combined with resources.
And the individuals, what's very striking about this is how much difference an individual can make who really commits himself or herself to this kind of social change, to the empowerment efforts. You really can't pick somebody. I mean, here, and since 1965, you've had this, just by building your own, in effect, private law firm.
Right. Sometimes my students ask me what is the principal characteristic needed for this kind of work, and without any hesitation, I answer stubbornness.
Why is that? Why?
You
Is it so
have
hard?
to stick with it. You have
Yeah.
to be willing to suffer through disappointments and failures, but to recognize that there are workable approaches to ending poverty. And really what the four of us are doing is all very complementary. You can do all four kinds of things simultaneously in the same country or the same province or the same village. But often resources are lacking. And I must say it would be helpful to have 1 or 2% of the brightest young people in this generation commit themselves to this kind of change, and this kind of work.
Very interesting. I was like,
Well, I think we are very complementary. In fact, all these areas that our three other awardees have talked about, I have tried to work in them in land reform areas. I've tried to work not in the same way as he has done, but organizing the poorest landless people to take hold of land, trying to work with the government to see if we could get this government land for the poor landless people and so on. So we have been successful to some extent, I think. And technology, rural technology, we have tried to work with them, not in the same way as our friend here, but I think these are all very complementary, and I think these are needed in all societies, in fact, that needs change. So our work is very complementary, and I feel that this kind of work needs to go on in many societies for prolonged periods, and then hopefully the global millennium goals that we have set for halving poverty by the year 2015 might be a reality if societies provided opportunities for young leaders to try and promote change in this way.
do you think it's a worthy goal? Are you optimistic that the world can actually get there?
I'm very optimistic that the world can get there, but I'm not so optimistic that our governments and the donors are going to keep to this. the way it should be in order to achieve these goals. So it's really, I'm a little hesitant to predict that the donor money would be forthcoming the way they are promised. And secondly, our government will be so committed to provide this education for all, healthcare for all, and so on, which is needed to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. But I'm certain that it can be done.
So it requires stubbornness on the part of the governments as well.
I think so. Yeah,
just
they're
stick to it.
committed themselves, but I just hope that they're stubborn enough to achieve these goals. It can be done.
Yeah, there's a famous sociologist by the name of Max Weber who wrote that political change is the long boring of holes through hardwood. That's much to be said about that.
What's the question?
The question is, as you listen to your colleagues, your fellow awardees here for the Gleitsman Awards, what conclusions do you reach about the role of grassroots activism and how it can change lives?
I'm so unhappy that all four of us are trying to change the world, particularly the poverty-stricken people. That means we have to wonder at this point of time whether poverty is growing or whether we are able to reduce the poverty. That's the question. Therefore, I think all the donors, all the international agencies, international assistance should take note of such innovations and then see that whether it is they should find partner not only with the governments, also in the civil society initiatives. Rather than all the time they think their money is so safe, they put it in the government. They should also find that the people's organizations or such initiatives, civil society initiatives, can be partners as well. That is the way that they should. And secondly, that many of us are not making these things and then leave it at that, saying that I think after me the deluge, the whole thing is that a large number of organizations, particularly in the northern part of India, if you have actually, all of you know that the vastness of the country as such is so big that India, we are trying to train lot of initiatives, lot of organizations, particularly they are coming from Bihar, UP, Bengal and Madhya Pradesh and UP and Bihar. They are all coming here, such organizations are getting themselves oriented towards this kind of organizing, establishing platform and then microcredit programs and all that. Only thing is that their commitment is even after having come and learned the techniques, they are not able to get the assistance neither from the government nor from the international agencies because there is nobody ready to believe the people's initiatives, and that is where I think how are we to establish a credibility to fight for these things is yet another effort that we have to take.
You're shaking your head, you're nodding your head.
Well, one thing that's on the horizon that all those listening or watching should know about is the Millennium Challenge Account legislation, which is presently before the U.S. Congress. It's an effort to increase U.S. aid by 50% over the next 4 years with a particular focus on poverty and trying to focus it on 20 countries where there appears to be the greatest hope for making a real dent in the poverty problem with those resources. It's potentially the most important development in at least U.S. foreign aid in the last 30 years. And I'll bet that less than 1% of the population knows of its existence at this point.
Interesting. Roman, if you could,
Also,
if you have your
for
final
English, I will
take,
try
yeah.
to explain what
Yes.
I mean. Also, I am sure that we should have action at all the level of the government for the third country, but also on the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
So you should address more level at the same time to have a chance to reach the goal. The second thing is, like I hear before, don't wait all for the government. Mobilize the people. they will say the same thing should be done in the developed country. The civil society should not wait that the government will make everything for them. The civil society should mobilize, like the woman in India, to press on the government to go to the lowest level. Well, as is explained before, the way the money come in is from the government go down, but at the end, a lot is evaporate before it come on the field. So if the civil society invest here in the developed country, you can create canal liaison between the civil society from this country to the civil society to the poorest country. This is very important. Well, the normal way we see from the top to the bottom doesn't function with the financing.
Right.
The good way is to go from the ground to the up. We confirm that.
Right.
But from the financing also should go from the bottom to the high. The people here should not say, okay, our government is in charge for that.
Right.
We are waiting result for the government. They should also impulse in this way.
Right. This has been a fascinating experience, and we all could talk on. Fortunately, there will be some time later in the day. You'll be at various things, and there'll be an event this evening where I hope that you'll have a chance to talk. We'll record that as well. And in the meantime, this is. I did not think it was possible that after last year's event, when they honored the Gleitsman Awards, went to American-based activists. I did not think it would be possible to be more inspiring than what we saw last year, but you exceeded that. Thank you.
David, may I make an observation?
Yes.
Trying to put myself in the place, which is not easy, a young person
Right.
observing what's going on here. I would come away with the fact that here are four people made a decision early in their life, maybe most cases after having tried corporate enterprises, that know there was something that they wanted to do that they felt was important. And number one, they'd come away with the fact that these people have changed the world, truly changed the world. And number two, most interesting, when you compare these people with what you might see about four business executives that were at the same point in their life, two past the age of normal retirement, and two approaching that age, there's no thought in anybody's mind of retiring, going back and playing golf.
He's ready to put on the rifle again.
These people are inspired by what they see, and they want to do more. So I think that's such a positive thing for someone to observe.
I agree.
Hopefully.
And I hope that you'll make some of the same observations tonight at the event this evening when the awards are presented. Those are very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank
Status. So if you're just an agricultural laborer or a sharecropper, rather than an owner-operator or someone who owns at least some land of your own, you're likely to have little status, little security, very low income. And in fact, landlessness is generally the best predictor of poverty in developing countries. So we've focused very narrowly on the issue of how to get ownership, or at least owner-like tenure to land, possession of land of a long-term secure kind into the hands of people who are presently landless or without such rights.
Are your 8 lawyers based in the United States, or are they based in the various countries, and are they of other nationalities, or are they American?
Present, we do have overseas staff who are non-lawyers, but our 8 lawyers are based presently 6 in the U.S., 1 in India, and 1 in China. We did have 1 in Indonesia, but he's at the moment back in the U.S. And have over the last 10 years at least typically had at least 1 or two of our lawyers stationed overseas for long periods of time. The ones who aren't generally do a great deal of traveling. So our work always starts in a country with intensive village.
That belittles the law school too much. I'm a graduate of the law school.
I know.
I haven't gone quite as straight as you have, but I've wandered from the life of the law as well. Tell us about your life and your organization.
I'm Roy Prosterman. I founded some years ago an organization called the Rural Development Institute, which is also affiliated with the University of Washington School of Law. We are primarily a group of 8 lawyers who work on what I might describe as applied development law, primarily issues of land tenure and land reform in traditional third world or developing countries, and also in the transitional or formerly centrally planned economies. We've worked over the years in 37 countries. I might begin by noting that unlike the U.S., where only 2% of the population works in agriculture, that globally about 45% of the population still makes its living from agriculture. And in the developing countries, it's usually a majority. So the nature of their relationship to land is of crucial importance. Land is the principal asset and the chief source of income and security and
About the results. What's the turnkey here? How do you make it actually work?
Well, you do have to have, as a kind of vector resultant of many different factors, you have to have a government in charge that is persuadable, or in some cases is already interested in carrying out major land reform measures, and is willing to listen to what can be achieved, the increase in production, the empowerment of farmers, the increase in social stability. Owner farmers tend to be a very conservative, stable group within the society. The general economic development that can result. Then there may be a dialogue of varying lengths of time as to what kinds of land reform measures look as though they will work under those cultural and social conditions and given what they've already done.
Do you work then from the bottom up with the farmers up through the system, or do you work with the people at the top of a system in a developing country and to work with reforming their land laws down?
Well, both in the sense it's bottom up to make the recommendations, building on the results of the village field work.
So you build up a grassroots movement or organization?
Sometimes they already exist, but often it's simply a question of gathering in a fairly systematic way data and information on what farmers already have or lack in terms of land rights and what's likely to be administrable at the local level. Then to take that up and formulate.
Each of you upon the recognition and the honor of winning one of these Gleitsman Awards from the Gleitsman Foundation. We've had the privilege here at the Kennedy School over the last few years to play host to these annual presentations, and as you saw from some of the students that you met with this morning, our students find this to be a thrilling experience to meet people from the field because you are such good role models for them. So our hope had been when you were here that we might capture something on film that would be useful for other students who were not able to see you in person, and also be good for our faculty to be able to use for training purposes. And what we're trying to draw from you today are your reflections, the lessons that you've learned in life and in the field about the role of social activism what you found, what you have found over the years, that you would want to pass on to the next generation about what you've done, what you've learned, and what might be instructive for them. And I think you have to assume that no one who's watching will know much about it, so people will please be quite elementary. So, Roy, if we could start with you, tell us who you are. You came out of Harvard Law School. Everyone will be very amazed that someone coming out of the Harvard Law School could give up the life of being a major corporate lawyer and doing something for behalf of mankind instead of your own.
Interviewing to ask farmers and landless people what their needs are, what their problems are, how the present land system works, and then gradually formulating policy recommendations which we bring to leadership in the country or in the province and see what may be done about the land problem.
I was astonished when Alan Gleitsman told me how many farmers that you've helped to gain ownership of land around the world. What do your numbers look like?
It's about, well, ownership and also owner-like rights. It's about 120 million households.
120 million households now have own land or have ownership rights as a result of 8 lawyers.
Well, the law is a highly leveraged tool.
It is. It's incredibly leveraged. That's unbelievable. I mean, is it 15 million people per lawyer or something like that? I mean, that's incredible leverage.
Well, it takes a great deal of stubbornness to achieve the result. There are countries where we've worked for 30 years without any result. There are other countries where we are able to come in at a moment when there's interest and openness and a window of opportunity, and perhaps in 4 or 5 years a major result can be achieved.
There's something here I'm missing. I hear about the lawyers. I hear